The brownstone at West 35th Street maintains its dignity through routine, and Tuesday morning was proceeding with the kind of orchestrated precision that makes Nero Wolfe's world bearable to him and profitable to me. At 11:15, he had descended from his morning session with the orchids, settled into his custom-built chair behind the desk, and was examining a seed catalogue with the concentration most men reserve for reading their own obituaries. I was at my desk, updating the expense account for our last case and trying to decide whether charging a client for Fritz's special imported paprika constituted legitimate business expense or highway robbery. The doorbell's chime interrupted this peaceful morning like a wrong note in a symphony. I answered it to find a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world than standing on our front steps. She was somewhere in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back severely and gray eyes that suggested she'd seen enough of life to be skeptical about most of it. Her coat was good quality, but not new, and she carried herself with the kind of careful composure that comes from practice at hiding worry. "Mr. Goodwin." Her voice carried a slight accent that I couldn't immediately place. "I'm Nadia Petrovich. I need to see Mr. Wolfe." "Do you have an appointment, Miss Petrovich?" "No, but I have something he needs to hear." She opened her purse and withdrew a small wooden box, about the size of a hardcover book. "My father said if anything happened to him, I should bring this to Mr. Wolfe. He said Mr. Wolfe would understand what it means. I've learned to recognize the signs of a case that's going to complicate my life. A mysterious object, a dead relative's instructions, and a client who shows up without an appointment but acts like she belongs here. These are red flags that wave themselves. But Wolfe pays my salary, and his curiosity has a way of overruling my common sense. "Wait here," I told her, and went to the office. Wolfe looked up from his catalogue with the expression he reserves for interruptions during his scheduled reading time. "Yes?" "Client with a music box. Says her father told her to bring it to you if something happened to him. The father's name was Petrovich." The catalogue closed with a soft snap. That got my attention. Wolfe doesn't abandon his reading for just any client, and the name Petrovich had clearly struck a chord, if you'll pardon the expression. "Show her in," he said. I brought Miss Petrovich into the office and settled her in the red leather chair. She sat with the music box in her lap, her hands protective around it like she was guarding something precious and dangerous at the same time. Wolfe studied her with the kind of attention he usually reserved for a particularly interesting specimen in his greenhouse. "Miss Petrovich, your father's given name?" "Lazar Petrovich." She paused, then added, "He died 3 weeks ago." "I see, and what did your father tell you about bringing that object to me?" She looked down at the box, then back at Wolfe. "He said if anything happened to him, I should bring the witness to you. He said you would know what to do with it." "The witness." That's what he called it, the witness in the music box. She lifted the box slightly. "There's an inscription on the inside of the lid. In Serbian, it says, 'The witness is in the box.' My father added a line in English. 'If I die, listen.'" Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, which for him is equivalent to jumping up and down. "May I examine it?" She handed over the box with obvious reluctance. It was made of dark walnut, polished smooth by years of handling, with brass fittings that had been kept carefully clean. Wolfe opened the lid and studied the interior. I could see the brass cylinder of the music mechanism and the delicate metal comb that would create the melody. "The inscription?" Wolfe murmured, reading the Cyrillic script. "Yes, Svedok je ukutiji. The witness is in the box." He looked up at Miss Petrovich. "Your father was from Yugoslavia?" "He came here in 1979 after the war. He never talked much about the old country, but he spoke Serbian at home when I was growing up." She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Wolfe, I think someone killed him for this box." That was the kind of statement that usually makes clients sound either paranoid or melodramatic. but Miss Petrovich said it with a matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting the weather, which made it considerably more interesting. "What makes you believe that?" Wolfe asked. "3 things. First, he was in perfect health. His doctor said he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. Second, the night before he died, someone broke into our office. Nothing obvious was stolen, but his desk had been searched. Third, he'd been acting strange for the past month. Nervous, secretive. He changed the combination on the office safe and didn't tell anyone, not even me." Wolfe wound the music box key and let it play. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful but somehow incomplete, as if notes were missing or the timing was deliberately off. It was a waltz, but a waltz that couldn't quite find its rhythm. "This tune," Wolfe said after letting it play through once. "Do you know what it is?" "My father said it was an old song from his village, but when I played it for a friend who's a musician, she said it sounded wrong, like someone had changed the original melody." Wolfe closed the box and set it carefully on his desk. "Miss Petrovich, what was your father's business?" "Dinar Imports. We specialize in Eastern European foods, spices, preserved meats, specialty items for restaurants and markets. It's a small business, but profitable." "Partners?" "One, Calvin Darnell. They've worked together for 15 years. She paused. "Cal has been asking a lot of questions about the music box since my father died. He says he's never seen it before, but I found a receipt in my father's desk for repairs done to it 6 months ago. The repair shop owner, Daniel Kay, said Cal brought it in." I was taking notes and watching Wolfe's face. The combination of a mysterious music box, a suspicious death, and a business partner with secrets was exactly the kind of puzzle that could keep him interested for weeks. "Who else had access to your father's office?" Wolfe asked. "Our sales manager, Reva Sloan, the warehouse foreman, Miroslav Jovan, everyone calls him Miro, and my father's oldest friend, Stepan Zorik. He's been coming around for tea and chess twice a week for as long as I can remember." Wolfe was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. Finally, he looked directly at Miss Petrovich. "I will undertake to determine what your father meant by calling this box a witness, and whether his death was indeed connected to it. My fee is $500 per day plus expenses." She didn't hesitate. "That's acceptable. Archie will need a complete list of everyone who had access to your father's business records, along with their addresses and phone numbers. You will also provide us with keys to the office so we can examine it thoroughly." "Of course." She opened her purse and withdrew a checkbook. "Should I make this out to you or to the business?" "The business will suffice," Wolfe said. $5,000 as a retainer." After she'd written the check and I'd shown her out, I returned to find Wolfe holding the music box and staring at it with the kind of concentration he usually reserved for a particularly challenging orchid. "So," I said, settling back into my chair, "what's really going on here?" "The melody, Archie, is indeed wrong. It's a traditional Serbian folk song, but someone has deliberately altered it. Notes have been changed. Timing has been shifted. It's as if someone encoded a message in the music itself." "A message about what?" "That remains to be determined. But I suspect Miss Petrovich's father discovered something about his business partners that made him fear for his life. He hid the evidence in the one place he knew it would be safe, in a piece of music that only someone with knowledge of the original could recognize as having been tampered with." I looked at the innocent-looking wooden box sitting on Wolfe's desk. "And you think someone killed him to get it?" "I think, Archie, that we are dealing with people who understand that sometimes the most dangerous witness is one that cannot speak, but can sing." He set the box down carefully. "Call Saul Panzer. I want him to look into Lazar Petrovich's death and the financial records of Dinar Imports, and arrange for us to visit their offices tomorrow morning. I want to see where Mr. Petrovich kept his secrets." I reached for the phone, already knowing that this case was going to be more complicated than a simple music box had any right to be. But that's the thing about working for Nero. "Wolfe, The cases that start with a tune usually end with someone singing a very different song. The music box sat silent on the desk, keeping its secrets for now. But in Wolfe's hands, I had a feeling it wouldn't stay silent for long. Wednesday morning found Nero Wolfe in his office at precisely 11 o'clock, having descended from his orchid rooms with the measured dignity of a man who has spent 2 hours contemplating both cymbidiums and crime. The music box sat on his desk where he'd left it the night before, its dark walnut surface reflecting the morning light streaming through the windows. I'd caught him winding it twice during breakfast, listening to that peculiar off-kilter waltz with the concentration most people reserve for their tax returns. "Archie," he said without looking up from the morning mail, "I expect we shall have visitors today. Miss Petrovich's colleagues will have spent the evening discussing our involvement, and curiosity is a more reliable motivator than conscience." I was updating my notes from the previous day's interview when the doorbell proved him right. It was 11:30, and standing on our front steps were 2 people who had clearly dressed for the occasion. The man was sleek and polished in the way that successful businessmen cultivate. Gray suit, confident smile, and the kind of handshake that comes with a lifetime membership to the right clubs. The woman beside him was younger, with auburn hair pulled back severely, and the sort of efficient posture that suggested she could organize a small army before lunch. "Mr. Goodwin, Calvin Darnell, Dinar Imports. This is my associate, Reva Sloane. Nadia mentioned she'd consulted with you regarding her father's passing." I showed them into the office, where Wolfe acknowledged their presence with a nod that could have been measured with calipers. They settled into the red leather chairs, Darnell crossing his legs with practiced ease, Sloane sitting forward slightly as if ready to take notes or make a quick exit. "Mr. Darnell, Miss Sloane." Wolfe's voice carried the tone he reserved for interruptions during business hours. "State your purpose." Darnell's smile was calibrated for maximum reassurance. "We wanted to offer our complete cooperation, of course. Lazar was like a brother to me. 15 years as partners. If there's anything that might help explain his sudden passing, we want to know about it." "How considerate," Wolfe replied dryly. "And what makes you believe there is anything to explain?" Sloane leaned forward. "Nadia told us she brought you something that belonged to her father. We're hoping it might shed light on some irregularities we've discovered in the business." That got my attention. In my experience, when business partners start talking about irregularities, it usually means someone's been creative with the accounting. "What sort of irregularities?" I asked. Darnell and Sloane exchanged a glance, the kind of look that passes between people who've rehearsed their story but aren't entirely comfortable with it. "Inventory discrepancies," Sloane said carefully. "Some of our higher-end items, specialty meats, imported spices, show up in our purchasing records but not in our warehouse counts. The financial impact isn't catastrophic, but it's concerning." Wolfe picked up the music box and turned it slowly in his hand. "When did you first notice these discrepancies?" "About 6 weeks ago," Darnell replied. "I brought it to Lazar's attention, but he said he was handling it personally. He could be secretive about his methods. Old country habits, you know." "Indeed." Wolfe wound the music box and let the haunting melody fill the office. Both visitors watched it with the kind of careful attention that suggested they recognized it. "Are you familiar with this particular item?" Darnell studied it with what appeared to be genuine puzzlement. "It looks like something Lazar might have kept in his office. He had various personal items. Photographs, mementos from Yugoslavia." "Serbia," Sloane corrected automatically, then caught herself. That's what he always called it. "The old country." Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction. "You seem well informed about Mr. Petrovich's preferences, Miss Sloane. We worked closely together on inventory management. He talked about his homeland sometimes." "I see. And you, Mr. Darnell, when did you last see this music box?" "I'm not sure I ever paid much attention to it, to be honest." Darnell's tone was casual, but I noticed his fingers drumming against his knee. Why? Is it significant somehow? Before Wolfe could answer, the doorbell chimed again. I went to find a short, compact man in his 60s standing on our steps, wearing a worn but clean overcoat and carrying himself with the dignity of someone who'd learned to make his own way in the world. I am Stepan Zoric, he said in accented English. Friend to Lazar Petrovich. His daughter, she told me she came here yesterday. I wish to speak for him if I may. I brought him into the office, where his appearance caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Darnell's smile became more forced, and Sloane's posture straightened even further. Zoric took one look at the music box on Wolfe's desk and stopped, as if he'd walked into a wall. So, he said quietly, it has come to this. You recognize it, Wolfe observed. Of course. Lazar showed it to me 3 days before he died. He said if anything happened to him, it would go to his daughter and then to you. He called it his insurance. Darnell made a sound that might have been a laugh. Insurance? It's a music box, for God's sake. Zoric's eyes never left the wooden box. In the old country, we learned to hide important things in plain sight. The Germans looked for gold and documents. They did not look for music. What did he hide? Wolfe asked. Truth, Zoric replied simply. About the war years. About what some men did to survive, and what they did to others. The silence that followed was thick enough to slice. Darnell had gone very still, and Sloane was gripping the arms of her chair as if she needed the support. That's ancient history, Darnell said finally. Whatever happened 40 years ago has nothing to do with our business today. Perhaps, Wolfe said, or perhaps the past has a way of demanding payment with interest. He looked at each of them in turn. Mr. Zoric, you will remain after the others leave. Mr. Darnell, Miss Sloane, you will provide Mr. Goodwin with complete access to your business records, including all correspondence with overseas suppliers. You will also submit to individual interviews at times of my choosing. Now wait just a minute, Darnell started. No, Wolfe said flatly. You came to my house uninvited, claiming concern for your late partner's reputation. You will demonstrate that concern through cooperation, or you will demonstrate something else entirely through resistance. Choose. They chose cooperation, though neither looked happy about it. After I'd seen them out and arranged for the promised access to their records, I returned to find Wolfe and Zoric sitting in comfortable silence, the music box playing its discordant waltz between them. Well, I said, settling back into my chair. Well, Archie, we have learned that our client's suspicions were well-founded. Her father's business partners are concealing something significant, and that something is connected to events that occurred decades ago in a country that no longer exists. Wolfe closed the music box with a decisive click. We have also learned that Mr. Petrovich was a man who understood the value of evidence and the importance of choosing one's confidants carefully. He looked at Zoric, who nodded slowly. Tomorrow, you will tell us what Lazar Petrovich feared, and why he believed this music box could protect his daughter from the consequences of his past. As Zoric left, I realized that the brownstone sanctuary had been well and truly breached. Whatever secrets were hidden in that innocent-looking music box, they were important enough to kill for, and dangerous enough that a dying man had entrusted them to the one detective in New York who specialized in making the guilty sing. The witness in the music box was about to find its voice. Thursday morning brought the kind of gray drizzle that makes Manhattan look like a watercolor left in the rain. I was arranging chairs in the office when Wolfe descended from his orchid rooms at precisely 11 o'clock, carrying himself with the measured dignity of a man who had spent 2 hours contemplating both cymbidiums and crime. The music box sat on his desk like a silent witness awaiting cross-examination. Archie, he said, settling into his chair with the finality of a judge taking the bench, we shall conduct individual interviews today. People reveal more when they believe they're speaking in confidence than when performing for an audience. Stepan Zorich arrived first, punctual as a Swiss timepiece and carrying the weight of decades in his careful posture. He accepted Fritz's coffee with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, I realized, but from the burden of memory. "Mr. Zorich," Wolfe began without preamble, "yesterday you spoke of truth and insurance. Explain." Zorich set down his cup and looked directly at the music box. "During the war, there was a man in our village, Milan Radic. He collaborated with the occupying forces, identified families hiding Jews and partisans. Many died because of his information, including Lazar's older brother and my uncle. And after the war, Radic disappeared. We believed he had fled to South America, like so many others. But 6 months ago, Lazar discovered the truth." Zorich's voice hardened. "Radic was here, in New York, living under a new identity, prosperous and respected. Lazar found proof, documents, photographs, even a confession Radic had written as insurance." Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction. "And this evidence?" "Hidden where Radic would never think to look. The melody in that box is from our village, but Lazar altered it, encoded the location of his evidence in the changed notes. Only someone who knew the original song could recognize what had been modified. At 2 o'clock, Miroslav Jovan filled the red leather chair like a mountain settling into a valley. His work-stained hands rested carefully on his knees, and his eyes held the watchful patience of a man accustomed to lifting heavy things and keeping his own counsel. "Miro," he said by way of introduction, his accent thick as warehouse dust. "Everyone calls me Miro." "Mr. Jovan," Wolfe said, "you were aware of inventory irregularities at Dinar Imports?" Miro's expression darkened. "Not irregularities. Theft, someone bleeding the company, systematic-like. Lazar knew. He was trying to catch them." "Did he suspect anyone specifically?" "He was careful, never said names. But he talked about snakes in the grass. Said sometimes the biggest snake is the one you feed every day." Miro's gaze moved to the music box. "That thing, he kept it locked in his office. Never let anyone touch. Said it reminded him of what he lost and what he saved." Daniel Kay arrived at 4, carrying a toolbox and the nervous energy of a craftsman more comfortable with mechanisms than conversations. He was thin and precise, with fingers stained by years of delicate work. "The Petrovich music box," he said, settling into his chair. "Beautiful Swiss movement, 1940s, but someone had tampered with it, recently, maybe 6 months ago." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "How so?" "The cylinder was recut. Pins moved, some removed entirely. Precision work by someone who understood the mechanism." Kay's professional pride overcame his nervousness. "Wasn't restoration, it was deliberate alteration. Created a new pattern while making it look like normal wear." "Who brought it to you?" "Calvin Darnell said he was doing Lazar a favor, that a spring was sticking. But the spring was fine. It was the cylinder that needed attention." Reva Sloan arrived precisely at 6, her efficiency extending to punctuality. She sat with controlled composure, a woman who had prepared for this interview like others prepare for board meetings. "Miss Sloan," Wolfe began, "your background includes Serbian language skills. Conversational level. Helpful with our European suppliers." She paused. "Mr. Petrovich had been researching genealogy recently, asking about shipping records to South America. He seemed to be looking for someone with family connections to our suppliers. Did you assist in this research?" "I offered, but he preferred to handle it personally. He also started asking unusual questions about our older clients, particularly those who had immigrated from Eastern Europe in the 1970s and 1980s. After she left, I found Wolfe staring at the music box with the expression he wore when multiple streams of logic were converging into a single, inevitable conclusion. "So," I said, "we have a war criminal living under false identity, a business being systematically looted, and a music box that's been deliberately altered to hide evidence. plus Calvin Darnell, who's either remarkably helpful or remarkably suspicious. Indeed, Archie. And we have confirmation that the encoding theory is correct. The music box contains a map to evidence that could destroy a man who has spent 30 years building a new life. Wolfe wound the box and let the discordant waltz fill the office. Tomorrow you will visit Dinar Imports and examine their records. You will also determine who has been following Miss Petrovich. Following her? Saul called while you were with Miss Sloane. Grey Honda, paper plates, spotted twice since Tuesday. Our client is being watched, which suggests our investigation has attracted unwelcome attention. The music box played its broken melody, each wrong note now clearly a signpost pointing toward a truth someone was willing to kill to keep buried. In the growing darkness outside, a grey Honda might be waiting, and inside our sanctuary, the witness in the music box was finally ready to sing its song of justice and revenge. The circle of suspects was complete, but the noose was only beginning to tighten. If you've never spent a morning in a warehouse that traffics in the edible longings of people with complicated histories, you've missed a particular bouquet that comes in waves. Smoked paprika, announcing itself first, then garlic, juniper, and the salty memory of barrels that have crossed oceans carrying more than just cargo. Dinar Imports occupied 2 floors of a converted warehouse in the garment district, with loading docks that had seen better decades and office windows that looked out over a maze of pallets like a watchtower over a refugee camp. I arrived at 10 sharp, armed with Nadia's keys and Wolfe's specific instructions to look for what others had missed. The grey Honda was there, parked half a block down with the kind of studied casualness that screams surveillance to anyone who knows the trade. I made note of the license, paper plates naturally, and headed inside. The office investigation. Lazar Petrovich's office told the story of a man who understood that survival sometimes depends on keeping 2 versions of the truth. The desk was organized with the precision of someone who'd learned that chaos could be fatal. But it was the small details that caught my attention. The bottom left drawer had fresh scratches around the lock, and tucked behind the false back of the top drawer was a slim leather notebook filled with entries in Serbian. Even without reading the language, the columns of dates and figures looked like a private accounting system, the kind a careful man keeps when he doesn't trust his partners. But it was what I found in a small wooden box hidden behind a framed photograph that made the morning worthwhile. 3 brass pins, each no bigger than a mouse's tooth, wrapped in tissue paper, along with a slip bearing musical notations in Lazar's careful handwriting, G5, B4+, E5I. The pins were clearly from the music box mechanism, removed with surgical precision. Mr. Goodwin? Reva Sloane appeared in the doorway, efficient as a Swiss timepiece and twice as reliable. Finding everything you need. Just getting oriented, I replied, slipping the pins into my pocket. Interesting filing system your late boss had. She settled into the visitor's chair with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent years managing other people's chaos. Lazar was meticulous about records, sometimes obsessively so. Obsessive enough to keep 2 sets of books. Her composure flickered for just a moment. A tell so subtle it would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years watching people lie for a living. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean this, I said, holding up the Serbian ledger. Care to translate? She examined it with the kind of careful attention that told me she understood every word. It appears to be a record of irregular transactions, items purchased but not properly logged into inventory. How irregular are we talking? Based on these figures, perhaps $50,000 over the past year, possibly more. I made notes while she provided a running translation. The pattern was sophisticated. High-value specialty items ordered through legitimate channels but diverted before reaching the warehouse. Someone with access to both purchasing and shipping had been running a careful, systematic operation. Character dynamics and revelations. Calvin Darnell chose that moment to make his entrance, radiating the kind of concerned partnership that comes with practice. "Nadia said you'd be here today. Hope you're finding what you need." "More than I expected," I told him. "For instance, I found these." I showed him the brass pins. "Removed from a music box you took to Daniel K. for repairs." His smile maintained its wattage, but his eyes went flat. "I told you I was doing Lazar a favor. If there were specific repairs needed, I wouldn't know the technical details. According to K, you had the cylinder deliberately altered. Pins moved, notes changed. That's not repair. That's sabotage. You're reading too much into, am I? Because I also found records of systematic inventory diversions totaling at least $50,000. Items ordered, paid for, but never reaching your warehouse. Care to explain that?" Darnell's practiced composure cracked like ice in spring. "Those are accounting errors. Lazar was investigating them himself. Right up until someone killed him for getting too close to the truth. The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke from a gun barrel." Darnell's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a shade that reminded me of old brick. "You're way out of line, Goodwin. Lazar was my partner, my friend. I'd never what? Never steal from him. Never betray his trust. Never silence him when he discovered your little side business. Financial crime. Documentation. After Darnell stormed out, Riva and I continued examining the files. The picture that emerged was of a carefully orchestrated money laundering operation using legitimate import channels. Purchase orders for non-existent merchandise created paper trails, invoices justified cash payments, and the money disappeared into accounts that probably existed only on paper. "The interesting thing," I told Riva, "is how it connects to your father's wartime research. If someone needed to clean money without attracting attention, a legitimate import business would be perfect, especially one with connections to Eastern European suppliers." She nodded slowly. Lazar had been asking questions about old clients, particularly those who immigrated in the late 1970s. He found passenger manifests from the SS Meridian, the ship that brought many refugees here after the war, including someone named Milan Radic. Her eyes widened. "How did you—" "Yes. Lazar found his name on the passenger list. Same ship, same sponsor organization. He arrived just a week before my father did. The surveillance element. As we left the building, the gray Honda was still there, engine running. This time I got a better look at the driver, middle-aged, careful posture, the kind of anonymous face that made him perfect for surveillance work. He followed us for 6 blocks before disappearing into traffic with professional skill that suggested military or police training." Return to the brownstone. Back at West 35th Street, I found Wolfe in the office with the music box open on his desk, studying the mechanism with a magnifying glass. He looked up as I entered, eyebrows raised in silent inquiry. "Productive morning, Archie?" I emptied my pockets onto the desk, the Serbian ledger, the brass pins, copies of the financial records, and my notes from the interviews. "We've got systematic embezzlement, deliberate sabotage of the music box, and a business partner who lies as naturally as he breathes. Plus our tail is still active, professional-grade surveillance." Wolfe examined the brass pins with particular interest. "Ah. So Mr. Petrovich removed these himself, creating a physical key to complement the musical one." He consulted the slip with the notations. G5, B4+, E5. Not just musical notes, but coordinates within the melody itself. Coordinates to what? To the location of evidence that could destroy a man who has spent 30 years building a new identity. Wolfe closed the music box with a decisive click. The altered melody doesn't just hide the location of war crimes evidence. It conceals the financial records that document decades of money laundering through legitimate businesses. So Lazar Petrovich discovered that Milan Radic was not only alive, but using dinar imports to clean dirty money. Precisely. And when Mr. Petrovich threatened to expose both the wartime crimes and the current financial fraud, he signed his own death warrant. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. "Tomorrow, Archie, we shall gather all our suspects and play them the true melody. Sometimes the best way to catch a killer is to let them know exactly what you've discovered, then observe who tries to silence the witness." Outside, the gray Honda might still be waiting, but inside the brown stone, the witness in the music box was finally ready to sing its song of justice, a song that had been 40 years in the making. The pieces were falling into place with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, and like any good mechanism, once you understood how it worked, stopping it became simply a matter of removing the right pin at the right moment. Friday morning arrived with the deceptive calm that precedes revelation, the kind of crystalline October day that makes Manhattan look like a photograph of itself. I was transcribing my notes from the Dinar imports investigation when Fritz appeared in the office doorway, wearing an expression I'd seen perhaps 3 times in 10 years. The look of a master chef whose domain has been violated by barbarians. "Archie," he said with the careful precision of a man delivering news of a death in the family, "someone has been in my kitchen." That statement carried roughly the same weight as announcing that someone had rearranged the orchids upstairs or used Wolfe's personal bathroom. Fritz's kitchen wasn't just sacred territory. It was the engine that powered Wolfe's contentment and, by extension, his willingness to solve other people's problems for money. The kitchen violation. I followed Fritz to his sanctuary, where everything appeared exactly as it should, which made the subtle wrongness more disturbing than obvious chaos would have been. Fritz moved with the purposeful stride of a general surveying a battlefield, stopping at his meticulously organized spice rack. "The Serbian paprika," he said, indicating a glass jar with a red label bearing Cyrillic script. "Someone opened it, searched through the contents, then resealed it. But not properly. The threads don't align correctly." He demonstrated with the delicate touch of a surgeon. "And this," he moved to another shelf and withdrew a small ceramic crock. "The ajvar. Someone replaced perhaps a tablespoon with an inferior substitute. They thought I would not notice." I examined both containers. The paprika showed tiny scratches around the lid's edge, and when Fritz opened the ajvar, the aroma carried a faint chemical undertone beneath the rich, smoky sweetness of roasted peppers and eggplant. "When did you last use these?" "The paprika, Tuesday evening for the goulash." "The ajvar, Wednesday night with Mr. Wolfe's lamb." Both were perfect then. Fritz's professional pride was wounded, but his memory was unimpeachable. And this morning, I found tissue paper behind the larger jars, the kind used to wrap delicate metal objects. Wolfe's response. Wolfe descended at precisely 11 o'clock, took one look at Fritz's agitated state, and listened to the report with the stillness of a predator scenting prey. When Fritz offered him the tampered ajvar to smell, Wolfe's expression shifted from mild interest to something approaching volcanic fury. "A trespass," he said quietly, which was more ominous than if he had shouted. "And a message. Someone familiar with Serbian cuisine, someone who understands that to tamper with my food is to challenge both my palate and my intellect." I was checking the locks when the phone rang. Nadia Petrovich's voice carried the controlled steadiness of someone who had spent the night making difficult decisions. "Mr. Goodwin, someone searched my apartment last night. Nothing obvious was taken, but they went through my kitchen systematically. Every spice jar, every container. They seemed particularly interested in anything connected to my father's homeland." The pattern emerges. After I hung up, Wolfe sat motionless for a long moment, his fingers steepled in contemplation. Then he opened his desk drawer and withdrew the small saucer where I'd placed the brass pins from Lazar Petrovich's music box mechanism. The saucer was empty. "When did you last see them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from his expression. "Yesterday evening, before dinner." His voice carried the controlled calm that precedes systematic vengeance. "Check the music box." I opened the wooden lid carefully. The mechanism was intact, but someone had attempted to reinsert pins in different positions. Tiny scratches on the brass cylinder showed where amateur hands had tried to alter the melody, then given up when the pins wouldn't seat properly. So our intruder took the original pins and the musical notations, tampered with Serbian food, items as a calling card, and tried unsuccessfully to scramble the music box's current pattern. I summarized. Professional entry, cultural targeting, but incomplete technical knowledge. Precisely, Archie. Someone desperate enough to violate this house, knowledgeable enough to target culturally significant items, but lacking the expertise to complete their sabotage. Wolfe reached for the phone. "Call Saul Panzer immediately." Forensic analysis. Saul arrived within 20 minutes, moving with his characteristic economy of motion. He examined the kitchen intrusion points, the music box, and the empty saucer with the methodical precision of a man who understood that evidence speaks louder than theories. "Professional entry through the area door," he reported after his examination. "Pick marks on the lock, but clean work. Timing suggests they knew your routines, entered after Fritz's morning marketing, left before his lunch preparations. Time frame? Between 9:30 and 10:15 this morning. They had keys to the interior doors or exceptional lock-picking skills." Saul held up a small evidence bag containing a dark hair. "Found this on the kitchen door frame. Coarse, straight, recently cut, and there are traces of metal polish on the spice rack shelf." Strategic counter-response. Wolfe listened to Saul's report with the satisfaction of a chess master whose opponent had just made a revealing move. "The intrusion confirms several things, Archie. First, we are close enough to the truth to make someone desperate. Second, they understand the cultural significance of the evidence but lack complete technical knowledge. Third, they have either exceptional criminal skills or inside knowledge of our routines, which suggests that one of our suspects is considerably more dangerous than they appeared, or they have professional assistance." Wolfe opened the music box and let the discordant melody fill the office. "The altered tune remains our primary evidence, and they failed to destroy it completely." He closed the box with a decisive snap. "Call Miss Petrovich and arrange for her to bring any additional items her father might have hidden. Schedule individual meetings with all our suspects for this evening. Tell them I've made significant progress in deciphering the melody's meaning. And contact Daniel Kay. I want him here with his tools to restore the original pin configuration." The trap preparation. As afternoon settled into evening, Wolfe orchestrated his response with the precision of a conductor preparing a complex symphony. The violation of his sanctuary had transformed this from a mere case into a personal matter, and Nero Wolfe's personal matters were resolved with absolute finality. "The intruder made a critical error, Archie," he said as we prepared for the evening's interviews. "They revealed not only their desperation, but their limitations. They can pick locks and conduct surveillance, but they cannot decode music or properly manipulate precision mechanisms. So we're dealing with hired help rather than the mastermind. Or a mastermind with incomplete skills who requires assistance for technical matters." Wolfe's smile was thin and predatory. "Either way, they have shown us their hand. Tonight, we shall show them ours." The witness in the music box had drawn first blood through its very existence. Now, with the brownstone sanctuary violated and Wolfe's personal honor engaged, the quiet investigation was about to become something considerably more dangerous for everyone involved. The subtle trespass had been noted, catalogued, and filed away for future reference. Soon it would be time for a reckoning that would be anything but subtle. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes bad news seem even worse by contrast. The violation of our sanctuary had transformed the brownstone's atmosphere from one of intellectual pursuit to something approaching a military command post. Fritz moved through his kitchen with the grim efficiency of a general whose supply lines had been compromised, while Wolfe descended from his orchid rooms, carrying himself with the controlled fury of a man whose personal honor had been challenged. I was reviewing the previous day's notes when the phone delivered the first blow of what would prove to be a systematic assault on our investigation. The technical sabotage. Daniel Kay's voice carried the brittle edge of a craftsman who had watched vandals destroy a lifetime's work. "Mr. Goodwin, you need to see this. My shop," they knew exactly what to take. 20 minutes later, I stood in what had been one of Manhattan's most precise repair workshops, now transformed into a monument to professional destruction. The glass display case was spider-webbed with cracks. Drawers had been systematically emptied, and specialized tools worth thousands of dollars had been selectively stolen. "Client ledger gone," Kay recited with the hollow precision of a man cataloging his losses. "Micro brooch set for pin seats gone. 2 spare Swiss cylinders from the 1940s gone. They even took my jeweler's loop." He gestured helplessly at the chaos, but they left the cash register untouched. "Professional job," I observed, noting the absence of random destruction. They knew what they wanted. "More than that," Kay replied, leading me to his workbench. "Yesterday afternoon, a woman came asking technical questions, too technical for casual curiosity. Auburn hair, efficient manner. Then, just before closing, a man appeared. Thick neck, polite demeanor, but his English carried that distinctive Balkan edge. He claimed to love music boxes and asked detailed questions about parts availability. The description of the woman matched Reva Sloane perfectly, while the man sounded like professional muscle with cultural connections to our case. Surveillance network. Revealed back at the brownstone, Saul Panzer was waiting, with information that transformed our understanding of the opposition we faced. He settled into the red leather chair with his characteristic economy of motion and opened a slim folder. "The gray Honda is registered to Gersh Security Services," he reported in his methodical way. "That's a shell company tied to the Red and Cultural Trust. The driver is Milos Petrovic. Note the surname. Former Yugoslav military, now freelance security. He's been watching the building since Tuesday." Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Petrovic? A relative?" "Distant cousin, according to immigration records. But here's the interesting part. The Rodin Cultural Trust is funded by Michael Radin, also known as Mihailo Radinovic in church directories from the 1980s. And if you examine a 1944 photograph from the Šumadija region, Saul produced a grainy wartime photograph. Milan Radic, regional collaborator. The family resemblance is unmistakable. I studied the photograph, comparing it mentally to the well-dressed businessman I'd glimpsed at various Serbian community events. 40 years of American prosperity had softened the face, but the eyes remained the same, calculating, predatory, utterly without conscience. So our war criminal is alive, prosperous, and actively protecting his interests, I summarized. "More than that," Saul continued. "Radin owns controlling interests in 3 import businesses, 2 construction companies, and a charitable foundation. He's been laundering money through legitimate enterprises for decades, using his cultural connections to avoid scrutiny." The cemetery revelation, armed with the musical coordinates Daniel Kay had helped decode from the restored music box, I spent the afternoon in Calvary Cemetery, conducting what felt like an archaeological expedition. Section 47, Plot 23 belonged to one Marko Jovanovic, deceased 1978, but the metal detector indicated something substantial, buried precisely 18 inches northeast of the weathered headstone. What I unearthed was a waterproof container about the size of a hardcover book, buried with the care of someone who expected it to remain hidden for decades. Inside were documents that made the entire investigation suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Photographs of Milan Radic in German uniform, signed confessions detailing his wartime collaboration, financial records documenting 30 years of systematic money laundering, and, most damning of all, a complete organizational chart showing the current structure of his criminal network. Calvin Darnell wasn't merely Lazar's business partner. He was Radic's nephew, brought to America specifically to infiltrate and monitor the Serbian import business. Riva Sloan was listed as a financial coordinator, while several other names I recognized from the Serbian community appeared as cultural liaisons, a euphemism for money laundering facilitators. Escalating intimidation. The afternoon brought a series of pressure tactics that demonstrated our opponent's growing desperation. Nadia Petrovich called to report that someone had broken into the Dinar Imports office using explosives on the safe, destroying most of the financial records. More ominously, Calvin Darnell had made an immediate cash offer to buy out her share of the business, an offer generous enough to suggest panic. "There's something else," she added, her voice tight with controlled fear. "This morning I found a note under my door. No envelope, just 6 words in block letters. Stop playing the music. Think of 1979. The reference to 1979 was particularly chilling, the year the SS Meridian had brought Milan Radic and dozens of other war criminals to American shores under the protection of refugee resettlement programs. Official intervention. By 5 o'clock, the pressure had escalated beyond the boundaries of private investigation. I called Inspector Kramer, knowing that his legendary temper would be perfectly suited to the situation we faced. Kramer arrived with his jaw set and his cigar in full morning attire. He listened to our recital with the grim attention of a professional who had seen enough human depravity to recognize a particularly sophisticated example. "So," he said after examining the cemetery documents, "you've got a dead importer whose doctor swears he had the heart of a marathon runner, a business partner who's actually the nephew of a Nazi collaborator, and a network of respectable citizens running a money laundering operation through cultural organizations. Why am I not surprised that you're in the middle of it?" "Because," Wolfe replied with satisfaction, "this is precisely the sort of institutional corruption that offends your instincts, Inspector. These people have spent decades hiding behind respectability while profiting from both historical crimes and current fraud." Kramer studied the organizational chart with professional interest. "What do you want from me?" "Visibility," Wolfe said simply. "Tonight, Mr. Redden is hosting a gala at the Serbian Cultural Center. Your conspicuous presence will narrow his options and force him to react rather than plan." The final preparation. As evening approached, the brownstone took on the atmosphere of a fortress preparing for siege. Saul positioned himself with a clear view of the street, monitoring the surveillance team that had expanded to include a black sedan and a white van. Fred Durkin took up position at the area entrance, while Ori Cather shadowed Riva Sloan's movements through the city. The witness in the music box had finally revealed its complete testimony. Not just the location of evidence, but a comprehensive indictment spanning 4 decades and 2 continents. War crimes, financial fraud, systematic money laundering, and murder were all documented with the precision of a man who understood that truth, properly preserved, could outlive its enemies. "Archie," Wolfe said as the last light faded from West 35th Street, "we have reached the point where further investigation becomes dangerous for all concerned. Tonight, we shall present our evidence and allow the guilty to reveal themselves through their own desperation." I checked the Colt in my shoulder holster, a familiar weight that had become more comforting as the day progressed. Outside, our watchers maintained their vigil, waiting for the moment when they could silence the last witness permanently. Inside, Nero Wolfe prepared to demonstrate that some witnesses sing loudest when their enemies believe they have been silenced forever. The pressure had increased beyond any reasonable breaking point. Soon, something would have to give, and Wolfe intended to make certain it wasn't justice. The music box sat silent on his desk, its restored mechanism ready to play the true melody that would bring 40 years of deception to an end. The witness was prepared to sing, and this time the song would be heard by everyone who mattered. Saturday evening in the brownstone carried the peculiar tension of a theatre before curtain rise, when the actors know their lines, but the audience suspects nothing. Wolfe sat behind his desk with the restored music box positioned like a silent witness awaiting its moment to testify. The cemetery documents were arranged in precise stacks, each piece of evidence catalogued with the methodical care of a prosecutor preparing for the trial of his career. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe orchestrate the destruction of a criminal enterprise without leaving his chair, you've missed seeing a master craftsman at work. He doesn't chase his quarry. He makes them come to him, and by the time they arrive, they're already caught. Strategic communications. Begin. At 7 o'clock sharp, Wolfe began his evening's work with the telephone and his fountain pen. "Archie," he said, settling his bulk with the finality of a judge taking the bench, "we shall invite our birds to a perch of our choosing. Dictation." I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter, recognizing the tone that meant someone's comfortable world was about to collapse. "First, to Mr. Calvin Darnell," he began. "Sir, the witness has been heard, and its testimony is complete. You will present yourself at my office tomorrow at 6 p.m. to address certain conclusions that have become unavoidable. Bring your passport and the original partnership agreement establishing your interest in Dinar Imports. Your failure to appear will be construed as acknowledgement of guilt in matters both financial and criminal." He paused, eyes half closed in concentration. "Add, the question of repairs performed 6 months ago will be resolved in your presence, along with your relationship to one Michael Radin." "That should get his attention," I observed. "Miss Sloane receives similar consideration." Wolfe continued. "Miss Sloane, the coherence of financial records now in my possession requires immediate clarification. I expect you tomorrow at 6 p.m. for a conference that will determine your future liberty. Bring the separate ledger you maintained for Mr. Petrovit's genealogical inquiries, particularly those concerning 1979 immigration records. You will also wish to address your academic credentials and your fluency in Serbian." I'd never asked her about Serbian language skills, but Wolfe's tone suggested he knew something I didn't. I kept typing. "Psychological pressure applications." The letter to Michael Radin was a masterpiece of controlled menace. Wolfe dictated it with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. "Mr. Radin, documents subscribed in the hand of one Milan Radic will be discussed publicly tomorrow, unless you prefer the privacy of my office. You will attend at 6 p.m., or you will explain your absence to Inspector Kramer and the press simultaneously. Any interference with my associates or premises will result in immediate publication of materials now held in trust." Then came the phone calls, each one a carefully placed chess move. First, Lon Cohen at the Gazette, to whom Wolfe offered just enough information to print a teaser about quiet inquiries into wartime activities of a prominent metropolitan philanthropist, without naming names. "After 6 tomorrow," Wolfe told Lon when pressed for details, "you'll have enough for a front-page story." Inspector Kramer received a sealed envelope and a promise. "If I'm wrong tomorrow, you can return it unopened and mock my methods. If I'm right, it will save you weeks of investigation and several international extradition requests." Individual confrontations. At 8 o'clock, Stjepan Zoric arrived carrying the weight of 4 decades on his shoulders. He settled into the red leather chair with the careful dignity of a man who had waited most of his adult life for this moment. "Mr. Zoric," Wolfe began, "tonight you will attend the Serbian Cultural Center's gala. You will make yourself conspicuous in observing Mr. Radin, and you will ensure that others notice your attention. When someone asks why you're watching him so intently, you will say, 'I knew him long ago in the old country, before he became so prosperous.'" Zoric's eyes brightened with understanding. "You want me to make him uncomfortable in front of his community?" I want you to remind him that some witnesses cannot be bought, threatened, or silenced. Wolfe opened the music box and let the restored melody fill the office. This tune will be played at the gala tonight. When it begins, I want you positioned where he can see your face clearly. At 9 o'clock, Reva Sloane arrived with her usual punctuality, but tonight her composure showed hairline fractures. She sat with the controlled attention of someone who had spent the day making difficult phone calls and receiving unwelcome news. "Miss Sloane," Wolfe said without preamble, "your afternoon consultation with Daniel Kay regarding music box mechanisms was remarkably well timed." Her carefully maintained expression flickered. "I don't understand." "Hours before his workshop was professionally burglarized, you inquired about the technical aspects of cylinder modification. The thieves took only items useful for altering musical mechanisms, a specificity that suggests inside knowledge." Wolfe wound the music box deliberately. "Particularly interesting since you demonstrated fluency in Serbian cultural traditions during our first meeting." She listened to the melody with the focused attention of someone who recognized both its beauty and its danger. "It's a traditional song from the Šumadija region." "Indeed, the same region where Milan Radić coordinated deportations for the German occupation forces." Wolfe's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I understand Mr. Radin has been quite generous to the Serbian community here. Cultural preservation, immigration assistance, charitable contributions." "He's a respected community leader," she replied carefully. "Respect purchased with 40 years of careful reputation management and strategic philanthropy." Wolfe selected a photograph from the cemetery documents. "This is Milan Radić in 1944, accepting commendation from German officers for his efficiency in identifying partisan sympathizers and Jewish families." The trap tightens. Calvin Darnell arrived at 10 o'clock, his usual Polish showing signs of strain. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted Fritz's coffee, and his eyes carried the haunted look of a man who had spent sleepless nights contemplating prison cells. "Mr. Wolfe, I understand you've been making serious accusations about my business practices." His voice carried an edge of desperation beneath its attempted confidence. "Not accusations, Mr. Darnell. Conclusions based on evidence." Wolfe produced the organizational chart from Lazar's cache. "According to documents your late partner preserved, you are listed as C. Darnell, nephew, American Operations Coordinator, in an enterprise headed by one Milan Radić." The color drained from Darnell's face like water from a broken dam. "Those documents are forgeries." "Perhaps. Inspector Kramer will have ample opportunity to verify their authenticity during the criminal investigation." Wolfe opened the music box again. "This melody contains more than sentimental value, Mr. Darnell. It's a cipher that leads to evidence your uncle has spent 4 decades trying to suppress." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Darnell said, his composure cracking completely. "These aren't just business disputes. There are people who will kill to protect what they've built." "Indeed, they already have." Wolfe's voice hardened with finality. "Lazar Petrovich died because he decoded this musical cipher and discovered the full scope of your operation. Now you face a choice: cooperate and minimize your culpability, or continue protecting a war criminal and face the complete consequences of decades of complicity." The evening's climax. At 11 o'clock, Saul Panzer called with news that transformed our careful positioning into checkmate. "The gala ended abruptly 20 minutes ago," he reported. Michael Radin left through the kitchen entrance with 2 men who looked like professional security. They're heading toward the docks. Wolfe smiled with cold satisfaction. Flight rather than confrontation. How predictable. He looked at Darnell, who was staring at the music box with the expression of a man watching his world collapse into a small wooden container. "It appears your uncle has abandoned you, Mr. Darnell. That leaves you in a rather exposed position. What do you want?" Darnell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Justice, Wolfe replied simply. For Lazar Petrovich, for the victims of Milan Radic's wartime collaboration, and for the integrity of institutions your network has corrupted. He closed the music box with decisive finality. Tomorrow morning, you will provide Inspector Kramer with a complete confession. Tonight, you will remain here under Mr. Panzer's supervision. The positioning complete. As the evening wound toward midnight, the brownstone had transformed from a sanctuary of detection into a fortress of justice. Through careful application of evidence, psychological pressure, and strategic timing, Wolfe had maneuvered his opponents into revealing their true nature and abandoning their carefully constructed defenses. The witness in the music box had finally found its voice, singing a song of accusation that had been 40 years in the making. War crimes, financial fraud, systematic money laundering, and murder, all documented with the precision of a man who understood that truth, properly preserved, could outlive its enemies. Archie, Wolfe said as the last light faded from West 35th Street, we have reached the point where further investigation becomes unnecessary. Tomorrow we shall present our complete case and allow justice to claim its due. Outside, Michael Radin might be fleeing toward international waters, but inside the brownstone, the machinery of justice was grinding toward its inevitable conclusion. The positioning phase was complete, and tomorrow would bring the final reckoning. A gathering in the office where truth would triumph over decades of carefully constructed lies. The music box sat silent on Wolfe's desk, its restored mechanism ready to play the true melody one final time. The witness was prepared to sing, and this time everyone who mattered would hear its song of justice, revenge, and the ultimate price of betraying both the living and the dead. If you've never watched Nero Wolfe orchestrate the complete destruction of a criminal enterprise without leaving his chair, you've missed seeing a master craftsman at the peak of his powers. Sunday evening at 6 o'clock found the office transformed into a courtroom where justice would be dispensed with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the finality of a perfectly played melody. The red leather chairs had been arranged in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk, where the music box sat like a silent witness awaiting its moment to deliver testimony that had been 40 years in the making. Inspector Kramer occupied the chair nearest the door, his cigar sending up smoke signals of professional satisfaction mixed with barely contained impatience. The assembly of guilt, Calvin Darnell entered at precisely 6 o'clock, escorted by Saul Panzer and carrying himself with the defeated dignity of a man who had spent sleepless nights contemplating prison cells. His usual polish had been stripped away, leaving behind someone who looked older, smaller, and infinitely more vulnerable than the confident businessman who had first graced our office. Reva Sloane arrived with her characteristic punctuality, but her composure showed hairline fractures that suggested expensive legal consultations and difficult phone calls. She took her seat with the careful precision of someone who understood that every word and gesture would be scrutinized for evidence of guilt or innocence. The surprise of the evening was Michael Radin himself, brought in by 2 of Kramer's men after his yacht had been intercepted by the Coast Guard just 12 miles short of international waters. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face a mask of strained dignity, but his eyes held the calculating coldness of a man who had spent decades evading justice. Nadia Petrovich sat quietly beside Stepan Zorich, whose presence radiated the quiet satisfaction of a man who had waited most of his adult life for this moment. Daniel Kay completed our gathering, his toolbox at his feet and his hands ready to demonstrate the technical aspects that would seal the case. The evidence presented. Wolfe surveyed his assembled audience with the satisfaction of a conductor preparing to lead a complex symphony. He opened the music box and let the restored melody fill the office, haunting, beautiful, and now complete with all its original notes intact. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty, You are listening to a folk song from the Šumadija region of Serbia, composed in the 18th century and passed down through generations of village musicians. 3 days ago, this melody was incomplete, deliberately altered to conceal evidence of crimes spanning 4 decades and 2 continents. He turned to Daniel K. Mr. K explained the technical nature of this musical cipher. K handled the restored mechanism with reverence. The original pins were removed and repositioned to change specific notes in the melody. When I restored the true pattern, the altered notes formed coordinates, not geographical, but archival. Cemetery section numbers, plot designations, burial locations. Creating a musical map, I added, that led to hidden evidence only someone familiar with the original song could recognize as having been tampered with. Wolfe produced the cemetery documents, spreading them across his desk like a prosecutor laying out evidence. These materials, preserved by Lazar Petrovic and recovered through the musical coordinates, establish beyond question that Michael Radin is Milan Radic, a war criminal who collaborated with German occupation forces, directly responsible for the deaths of at least 47 civilians. The systematic revelation, but Mr. Radic's crimes did not end in 1944. Wolfe continued, his voice hardening. They merely evolved. He arrived in America in 1979, adopting a new identity and establishing a sophisticated money laundering network using legitimate cultural organizations and import businesses. He looked directly at Calvin Darnell. Mr. Darnell, you will explain your role as American Operations Coordinator in this enterprise. Darnell's voice cracked like ice in spring. My uncle brought me to America when I was 19. Said we were starting fresh, building something legitimate. I didn't learn about his wartime activities until I was already too deep to escape. When did Lazar Petrovich become a threat to this network? 6 months ago. He got suspicious about inventory discrepancies, started researching genealogies, connecting names from the old country to current business relationships. Darnell's hands trembled. When he decoded the music box and found the cemetery cache, my uncle said he'd become too dangerous to ignore. The murder method revealed. Kramer leaned forward, his professional instincts fully engaged. How did Petrovic die? Digitoxin, Darnell whispered. Concentrated extract from foxglove plants, administered in his evening tea. My uncle said it would mimic natural heart failure, an old man's heart giving out from stress. Who administered it? Wolfe asked. Milos Petrovic, the security specialist. He had access to Lazar's office, knew his routines. The poison was mixed into ajvar, roasted pepper spread, that Lazar kept in his office for evening tea. Wolfe nodded with grim satisfaction. A culturally appropriate delivery method that would mask the bitter taste while ensuring absorption. The ajvar found in Mr. Petrovic's office was not from his own company's inventory. It was specially prepared for murder. Physical evidence. Confirmation, I produced the evidence bags Saul had collected. Hair samples from both the kitchen intrusion here and Daniel K.'s workshop match Milos Petrovic, confirming his role in both the surveillance and the attempted evidence tampering. Wolfe turned to Reva Sloane. Miss Sloane, your technical inquiries at Mr. K.'s workshop, followed by the targeted theft of music box repair tools, establishes your role in attempting to destroy the musical evidence. Her carefully maintained composure finally cracked. I didn't know about the wartime activities initially. I thought we were just optimizing tax structures for legitimate businesses. But when Lazar started asking questions about Serbian genealogies and 1979 immigration records, you realized the scope of what you'd become involved in, Wolfe finished, and chose to protect the network rather than face the consequences of your complicity. The complete confession. Michael Radin finally spoke, his voice carrying 4 decades of carefully constructed authority. This is an elaborate fabrication based on ancient grudges and forged documents. Mr. Radin, Wolfe replied with cold precision, The documents bear your signature and include details that only the perpetrator could know. More importantly, they led us to financial records documenting 30 years of systematic money laundering through your network of cultural organizations. He wound the music box one final time, letting the complete melody fill the office. Lazar Petrovich spent months decoding this musical cipher, understanding that you had used his own business to launder criminal proceeds while hiding behind the respectability of cultural preservation. When he threatened to expose both your wartime crimes and current financial fraud, you ordered his murder. The digitoxin was administered by your security operative, delivered in a manner that would appear natural while honoring the cultural traditions you've spent decades exploiting. Justice delivered. As the evening wound toward its conclusion, the complete scope of the criminal network stood exposed. Calvin Darnell would provide full cooperation in exchange for consideration regarding his degree of culpability. Reva Sloan faced charges for financial fraud and conspiracy. Michael Radin would be extradited to face war crimes tribunals in addition to federal charges for murder and money laundering. Nadia Petrovich sat quietly beside the music box, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the complete scope of her father's courage and sacrifice. "He could have remained silent," she said softly. "Could have taken his suspicions to the grave." "But he chose justice over safety," Wolfe replied. "And he chose it not just for himself, but for all the victims whose voices had been silenced by fear and time." The witness speaks, as Kramer led the guilty parties away and the others departed into the October evening. The brownstone slowly returned to its customary silence. The music box sat on Wolfe's desk, its secret finally revealed and its purpose fulfilled. "Archie," Wolfe said as Fritz appeared to announce that dinner was served, "we have demonstrated once again that truth, properly preserved, can outlive its enemies. The witness in the music box has sung its song, and justice has claimed its due." Outside, the surveillance network had collapsed, along with the criminal enterprise it protected. Inside, Nero Wolfe had once again proven that some witnesses sing loudest when their enemies believe they have been silenced forever. The gathering was complete, the truth revealed, and justice served with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the finality of a perfectly played melody. The witness had spoken, and its testimony would echo through the corridors of justice for decades to come. The music box played its final notes in that office, no longer a cipher but a song of remembrance for the dead who had finally found their voice, and for the living who had chosen courage over comfort in the endless struggle between truth and deception. The office had the atmosphere of a courtroom where the verdict was already written but hadn't yet been read aloud. Monday evening at 6 o'clock found our assembled cast of characters arranged in the red leather chairs like defendants awaiting sentence, while Nero Wolfe sat behind his desk with the music box positioned before him like the star witness it had always been. Inspector Kramer occupied his usual chair, cigars sending up satisfied smoke signals. Calvin Darnell slumped in defeat, his polished businessman veneer finally stripped away. Reva Sloan sat with rigid composure that fooled nobody, least of all herself. But it was Michael Radin who commanded attention, brought back from his failed yacht escape by the Coast Guard, still carrying himself with the arrogance of a man who'd spent 40 years believing his secrets were buried deeper than anyone could dig. The systematic unraveling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty, "we have reached the conclusion of a matter that began in 1944 and required 40 years to achieve resolution. The witness you see before you," he gestured to the music box, "has finally delivered its complete testimony." He opened the wooden lid and wound the mechanism, letting the restored melody fill the office with its haunting beauty. This folk song from the Šumadija region of Serbia was deliberately altered by Lazar Petrovich to create a musical cipher. Each changed note corresponded to specific coordinates, not geographical, but archival. cemetery section numbers, plot designations, burial locations where evidence of crime spanning 4 decades had been carefully preserved. I watched the faces around the semicircle as the melody played. Radin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, while Darnell closed his eyes as if the sound caused him physical pain. The technical brilliance of the encoding, Wolfe continued, lay in its cultural specificity. Only someone intimately familiar with the original song could recognize that it had been tampered with. Mr. Daniel Kay confirmed that 3 pins had been removed from the cylinder and 4 others repositioned, creating a map that led directly to Calvary Cemetery, Section 47, Plot 23. The murder method exposed. Wolfe's gaze settled on Rodin with the intensity of a predator studying prey. When Lazar Petrovich decoded his own musical cipher and recovered the evidence it concealed, he discovered that Milan Radic, a wartime collaborator responsible for the deaths of at least 47 civilians, had not fled to South America, as believed, but had established himself in New York as the respected philanthropist Michael Radin. "That's preposterous," Radin said, but his voice lacked conviction. "On the contrary, it's documented fact. The cemetery cache contained photographs, signed confessions, and detailed reports of your wartime activities, all preserved in your own hand as insurance against potential betrayal by your German handlers." Wolfe opened a manila folder and withdrew a photograph. "This shows you accepting commendation from occupation authorities for your efficiency in identifying partisan sympathizers and Jewish families." The silence that followed was thick enough to slice. Even Kramer leaned forward, studying the damning image. "But your crimes did not end in 1944. Wolfe continued relentlessly. "They evolved. You established a sophisticated money laundering network using legitimate cultural organizations and import businesses. Dinar imports, among others, served as conduits for cleaning criminal proceeds while you hid behind the respectability of cultural preservation." The network structure revealed. "Mr. Darnell," Wolfe said, turning to the broken businessman, "you served as American Operations Coordinator, managing day-to-day activities while maintaining plausible deniability. Miss Sloan handled financial coordination, ensuring money moved through legitimate channels without attracting regulatory attention." Darnell's voice cracked when he spoke. "I was 19 when my uncle brought me to America. I thought we were building something legitimate. By the time I learned the truth, I was too deep to escape." "When did Lazar Petrovich become a threat to this network?" I asked, following Wolfe's lead. 6 months ago. He got suspicious about inventory discrepancies, started researching genealogies, connecting names from the old country to current business relationships." Darnell's hands trembled. "When he decoded the music box and found the cemetery cache, my uncle said he'd become too dangerous to ignore." "The digitoxin delivery." Wolfe nodded with grim satisfaction. "The murder method was chosen for its cultural camouflage and medical plausibility. Digitoxin, concentrated foxglove extract, administered in ajvar, the roasted pepper spread Mr. Petrovich kept in his office for evening tea. Milos Petrovich, your security operative and distant cousin," I added, consulting my notes, "posed as a delivery driver from a Serbian specialty food company. He replaced Lazar's regular supply with a contaminated batch." "The beauty of the method," Wolfe observed with clinical detachment, "lay in its specificity. Ajvar's strong flavor would mask the bitter taste of the poison, while digitoxin poisoning produces symptoms identical to sudden cardiac arrest, particularly plausible in a man of Lazar's age." Kramer stubbed out his cigar with satisfaction. "The medical examiner confirmed it this morning. Tissue samples showed digitoxin levels consistent with deliberate poisoning." "The evidence tampering attempts." "After the murder, your network pursued 3 objectives," Wolfe continued. "First, neutralize the musical cipher by stealing the restoration tools from Mr. Kay's workshop. Miss Sloane's technical inquiries the afternoon before the burglary revealed the specific equipment needed." Riva's composure finally cracked. "I didn't know about the wartime activities initially." I thought we were just optimizing tax structures for legitimate businesses. But when you realized the scope of what you'd become involved in, you chose to protect the network rather than face the consequences of your complicity. Wolfe's tone carried no sympathy. Second, you attempted to destroy the cemetery cache, though we had already recovered it. Third, you accelerated the destruction of financial records, using explosives on the dinar import safe. The trespass revelation. The violation of this brownstone was your most desperate measure, Wolfe said, his voice hardening with personal affront. The targeting of Fritz's Serbian paprika and ajvar was both a calling card and an attempt to replicate the murder method, a crude psychological warfare that revealed more about your desperation than your cunning. I produced the evidence bags Saul had collected. Hair samples from both the kitchen intrusion and Kay's workshop matched Milos Petrovich. The tissue paper used to wrap music box pins was found behind the spice jars, and metal polish residue on the shelf matched polish from Kay's workbench. The final accounting. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in satisfaction. The chain of evidence is complete and unbreakable. Milan Radic became Michael Radin, established a money laundering network, murdered Lazar Petrovich when he threatened exposure, and attempted to destroy all evidence of both his wartime crimes and current criminal activities. He opened the music box one final time, letting the complete melody fill the office. This folk song has done what a courtroom sometimes cannot. It kept faith with the dead and remembered what the living tried to forget. Radin made one last attempt at defiance. Your performance depends on forged documents and sentimental devices. No, Wolfe replied calmly. It depends on inference from conduct. You tampered with the one thing you could not help but fear, an honest record. The sequence of your actions, from murder through evidence destruction to flight, is sufficient proof of guilt. Justice delivered. Kramer rose with the satisfaction of a professional watching a complex case reach its inevitable conclusion. Michael Radin, you're under arrest for the murder of Lazar Petrovich, conspiracy, money laundering, and we'll let the international courts sort out the war crimes charges. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Nadia Petrovich spoke for the Sazonum, first time that evening. My father said the witness was in the box. He meant more than just the papers, didn't he? Indeed, Wolfe replied gently. Your father understood that sometimes the most profound truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to listen. He ensured that even in death, his voice would finally be heard. The aftermath. As the guilty were led away and the others departed into the October evening, the brownstone slowly returned to its customary peace. The music box sat silent on Wolfe's desk, its 40-year burden finally lifted. Archie, Wolfe said as Fritz appeared to announce that dinner was served, we have demonstrated once again that truth, properly preserved, can outlive any attempt to silence it. The witness has sung its song, and justice has claimed its due. I closed my notebook and looked at the innocent-looking wooden box that had brought down a criminal empire. Some music is worth waiting 40 years to hear played correctly. Indeed, Wolfe replied, rising from his chair with the satisfied air of a man whose work was complete. And some witnesses sing loudest when their enemies believe they have been silenced forever. The case of the witness in the music box was closed, but its lesson would endure. That courage, properly applied, can bridge any gap of time or distance, and that justice, like a well-crafted melody, finds its way to resolution no matter how many obstacles are placed in its path. The music had ended, but its message would echo through the corridors of justice for decades to come.